Hey everyone, can everybody hear me? And if so, good morning and welcome to the forecasting course in Whitson Plus. It's basically a course that covers decline curves, auto forecast, type well. My name is Venkata. I have a really long name, but I go by Teja right here. And I think I figured out an easy mnemonic. It's basically if you see me and you have a deja vu, you know my name. It's basically Teja, right? So this is virtual. We're holding such courses virtually through the year, and this would be the last one for this year. And we do forecasting course specifically at least twice a year. We had one in May. Matthias was taking care of that. And this is the last one this year in December, and I'll be taking care of you all today. Um,
Hey Teja,
yeah,
real quick question. I've got a couple of guys on my team that
yeah.
are they're trying to join the teams meeting, but it's showing like that they need to like be let in or something. Are you seeing anything on your end where you can like admit
Let me
them
double
to the
check.
meeting?
Yeah, I think so. I do see. Give me 1 second. I'll take care of that.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right. I think everybody should be in now. Let me know if anybody's still in the lobby, okay?
Yeah, I'll take care of the lobby going forward. Yeah, you can
Perfect.
send the course. Sorry about that.
Perfect. Yeah, no worries. Awesome. Glad to have more people. Perfect. So yeah, I'm actually excited about doing this course this time around, specifically this training because we've had some good upgrades all through the year, and hopefully that shows you the kind of commitment we're putting towards forecasting at Whitson Plus. Ultimately, if you need a course certificate, we'll be happy to provide one for DCA for this course, and feel free to reach out with a quick message or a note, and we'll be happy to give you that certificate. Okay. I do have my eye on the chat, and if anything comes up, feel free to type that out in the chat, even if that's a question, a concern, or a feedback, or areas that we could improve, or if it's a funny thought, go for it. Yeah. So anytime you need a course certificate, feel free to reach out. Um, Really, this is what I was alluding to earlier with my talk about how we do these trainings through the year. So this shows you a few of the previous courses that we've done and few of the upcoming courses coming up. So this one we're at December. Let me know if there's anything, okay? But we're on DCA and Type Wells. The next one coming up is the comparison plots in Whitson Plus. That's a really interesting course. Kind of wraps up everything that we've been doing in Whitson Plus into a single plot where you can start comparing wells. And then there's the PVT and phase behavior in sometime in February. Okay. Training is definitely one of our favorite things, and we receive a lot of feedback. We get to talk to a lot of people, and ultimately we get to improve the software. The software itself, I've been working with Whitson for about 3 to 4 years now, and it's been an interesting journey. We basically started as an RTA, PVT, bottom hole pressure, and RTA software, but effectively we've expanded based on all the support that we've received from you, all the feedback, and a great set of developers on our end, of course. But effectively, we have all these different modules that you can explore. For anybody who hasn't used Whitson Plus before, this is relevant, I guess, where you can go through DCA and Type Wells, all the forecasting tools, PVT, bottom hole pressure calculations, and all the way in terms of the life cycle of the well data to go from production data to bottom hole pressure calculations and then some advanced RTA analysis or history matches. We also have some features that might interest production engineers. That is the nodal analysis, and within that we have a bunch of new features such as multi-well gas lift optimization and things like that. And there's a specific nodal course that we do in this in the year as well. The last training that I did was well testing. That was really fun. And if you missed that out, I think there's a recording somewhere in the weekly emails that Jessica sends out. So feel free to like reach out if you have any questions or if you can't find the recording. But today we'll be focusing on the DCA and the Typewell portion of the software. And truly, it's one of my favorite portions of the software. And so let's get right into it. So one of the main things that we pride ourselves on really is the support that we extend to all our clients, and I mean all our clients. So effectively, if you need any help, or if you're stuck somewhere, if there's a button that's not working, and really blocking you, feel free to reach out to support@whitson.com. And the idea is we want to make sure that you are working with a real engineer who understands the problem and then can take care of that rather than you chasing this down over months. We get back to you in 2 minutes, and if it's an easy fix or if it's something that if it's an easy improvement, great piece of feedback, very, very requested, we absolutely get that in there really, really quickly. And definitely some of the easier ones, some of the ones specific to domains within the same day. Okay. And the last time that Matthias was doing this training, a lot of this was actually a part of the new release, but I'm excited to tell you that a lot of those features are in the software now, and we'll be working through a few of these screens definitely here today. So for those who have done the course before, I just wanted to give you a preview of what's new and what we'll be working through. So we've got GIS and filtering features now. That's more upgraded, a little bit more intuitive in terms of how to use it. You've got all your wells, maybe you have some groups, and maybe you have some conditionals, and all of those conditionals can be tacked on with your operators like and or and things like that. And in most cases, maybe you're working with a well list and you can drop that right here. Okay, we'll work through this while we're in the software. I'll be happy to show you. And apart from that, we've got requests to QA, QC the data, not one well at a time, but more wells at a time, really quickly, just go through hundreds of wells and look at some auto forecasts or look at some imported cases, etc. So that's one way you can kind of bulk view the wells now and all their declines. You get a quick excerpt of what the key takeaways from that decline look like, the EOR, CUMEs, etc. And we'll be looking at this as well. There's a module called group forecasting now. It's a part of the multi-well analysis where effectively you can take a group of wells and then forecast them together as an aggregate or an average. But effectively, this is really built for rolling up a pad level or a field level or a pad level or area level forecasts and bring that into a group forecasting scenario here. We'll be using this to basically see how our wells did compared to the type well, right? The forecast manager is finally here. So if you haven't seen it already, you can kind of access it from the auto forecast page or the wells page, and it should be there. I'll show you where the button clicks to get there. But effectively, we have a forecast manager now that takes care of serving all the statistics and all the results and all the numbers you require for analyzing an imported or a created forecast in Whitson. So any and all forecasts that you see on Whitson should be accessible through the forecast manager, where you can start doing some analysis and looking at variance reports and all sorts of good things over there. We also have a statistics section within the forecast manager that helps you compare those forecasts. So you're looking at within the forecast manager, the statistics view, where I've loaded up 2021 compared to 2022 forecasts. And you see for the group of wells that I was comparing, I can see distributions, I can see probit plots, I can also see unity plots to see what changed and what didn't change or etc. So really good QC tools at the end of your forecasting lifecycle. And effectively, at the end of all of that work, we end up with a type well, and maybe those type wells are used to predict performance of new wells or infill wells or things like that. So let's say you have a future well, you can now assign the type wells that you create. So any saved type well case that you create, you can kind of assign those cases back to a well. And now what you'll see is that even if the well does not have production data, the well will at least have a type well that we'll be tracking it against. So hopefully when you get fresh production data from this well, it'll tack right on top of that type well that you produce. Okay. Just a quick glimpse here, but the idea is to not go deep into it today. But the idea is there's a new feature for PNR DCA as well, where instead of just using rates versus time or rates versus cume, we'll be looking at pressure normalized rates and then converting those to hypothetical rates at abandonment and effectively drawing a decline on that. And I'm happy to have have a discussion right at the end on how we can work with PNRDC as well. So really quickly before we jump right into a little bit of theory, but most of the work we'll try to keep it on in within the software and spend as much time as we can with it. But effectively, what we're looking at is just some basics for anybody new to Whitson, right? So today, at least for the course today, first things first, we'll make sure that everybody can log in. I think Mo is taking care of you guys in the chat, and so effectively anybody who's participating in the course can go into courses.whitson.com. Your username would be your email, and just so everybody can I'll pause on this slide for a second. Just let me know if anybody cannot log in, and we'll fix that for you here really quickly. Okay. The password is DCA Type Wells 2025. I'll just drop that in the chat as well. I think Mo already did. Yeah. So I'm hoping everybody can log in and get into the software. If you need any help, let us know. But really, this is the domain that we'll be using today. I know a lot of our clients will be attending the training as well, but you don't have to use your company domain. You can use courses for just this training. For anybody listening into the recording later on, feel free to do it on your domain, because effectively the domains or the software is the same irrespective of the domain. It's just that when you do it on courses, while we're doing it live, we can jump in and help you really quickly. All right, so perfect. So if you're in courses.whitson.com, there should be a company-wide field called Forecasts in Whitson December 2025. Okay, I created a project for a field for us called Forecasts in Whitson 2025, and that's what we'll be working in. So feel free to click into that field. So you see a list of projects. Most likely that'll be blank for you, and we'll get started from there. But really, once you get into the software, you'll notice that the layout is pretty typical, where the workflow or the modules are laid out as you would follow the workflow, right? So or basically you would do PBT, you would look at production data, you have your forecasting and decline curve analysis on that one single well, and then you have bottom hole pressure and all the rest of the elements related to one well, right? So if you're under production data analysis, you're basically looking at doing it one well at a time, or looking at one well, right? There's also a multi-well analysis here, and we'll look at that in a second. But effectively, I would recommend zooming out if you're zoomed in, because the software is built for larger screens, and so if you zoom out to about 50% or 67%, and I think I've had luck with 80%, but the software would be looking much better. Effectively, you want to make sure that nothing's spilling over. Of course, if you need more screen real estate, feel free to click F11 on your keyboard. And once you do, you should have those bars at the bottom and the top disappear, and that screen stretched out. The last thing is effectively, if you want even more screen space, right, there's a hamburger menu that can collapse this entire panel on the left into the left. Okay, so if you want maximum screen size, F11 and collapse this navigation menu. Perfect. So that navigation panel is basically where you would navigate from one module to another module. So if you're navigating within the production data analysis, you'll always see which well you're working with. So that's the well that you're looking at. But if you're in the multi-well analysis, we'll see what that looks like. But effectively, that's a set of projects on its own. So anywhere you are in terms of the software, you'll have an address or how do you find yourself is basically this bar at the top. And effectively, you're in the Permian field with the project main for the well hunt within the analysis or scenario called main. Okay, so that's your address bar, kind of like your GPS location within the project. And then the way the software is laid out is you have fields, projects, wells, and then within wells, you might have multiple scenarios. Okay. The way the software is laid out, the reason the software is laid out this way is because we are a PBT company to begin with. So effectively, the equation of state model is super important. All the wells within the projects, within one field will use the same equation of state. So if you have a Bakken asset and a Permian asset and an Eagleford asset, maybe you have three different fields in your company domain, and each one of those fields will be using a field-tuned equation of state or an equation of state specific to that. That's the best case, and in the average case, it would be the default. Okay. But effectively, you might have different fields for different assets. Then within those fields, or assets, you have different projects for different purposes. And then you have your wells, right? Most companies, the way they're operating is they'll have a main project or a daily project that brings in all the fresh production data and pressures for the operated wells. And so you can most companies basically work on that project. Okay. You can also go next or previous within the project using those arrow keys. And then if you click that drop down for analysis or scenario, you'll be able to create your own scenarios. So if multiple people were working on the same well, I recommend creating your own scenario so you're not stepping on each other's toes like that. Okay. Awesome. And effectively, you can go to the well overview page or the scenarios page. You can change units up top, like for the folks around the world. You can kind of switch between field or different unit systems right here. Okay. All of the input will be within cards, etc. So you'll see what that is about. Okay. And effectively, that most important button in the whole software is actually right up top. It looks like a comment button. And effectively what it is it's a feedback or question dialog box, right? Once you click it, all you need to do is give it a title, give it a satisfactory description. Doesn't have to be too long, doesn't have to be too short. But effectively, as soon as you click save, that sends an email to all of us at Whitson, and anyone who can help you out will definitely get back to you within the 2 minutes that we do. Awesome. And of course, there's a user manual. So the question mark icon on the top right will also show you the user manual. Okay. Really quickly, one of the tips that we always give out is that refreshing is a good idea, just in case you feel like something's not right. If you have doubts, just go for it and click Control plus R, or Control Shift plus R, and that should fix it. Okay. So I'll jump right in. We'll go through a few slides here and there. Mainly, I want to cover a little bit of the basics. And then once we get through the basics really quickly, we'll jump right into the software. And I have a mission for us. We're going to forecast or generate a type well from a set of wells, and it'll be a lot more fun to be in the software. So, okay. So really quickly, DCA outline, this is what I had planned. We'll look into the ARPS equations. We'll look into contributions from Petkovich. We look at the different segment types that we support in Whitson Plus. We also look at decline rate types. We'll talk about limiting decline rate and ratio forecasting. And that kind of covers the gamut of different things that you might want to do with single well decline curve analysis. But while we're going through this in the software, I'll show you a few more tricks. Okay. Really, it starts from the flow regimes, right? Everything that we do in the industry, especially with respect to single wells, starts with analyzing flow regimes. And you have infinite acting flow. When you bring the well online, the pressure travels as if it does not know any boundaries. So effectively, that's the flow regime we'll be in for a few months or a few years. But effectively, once we start seeing at least one reservoir boundary, right? We go into what's called a transitional flow. That transitional flow period is effectively one where you have maybe parts of the lateral that are still flowing linearly, parts of the lateral that are experiencing boundary dominated flow. It's a superposition of multiple signatures, right? So you're not fully in infinite acting flow, but you're not fully in boundary dominated flow when you're in transitional flow. Okay, so the boundary dominated flow, that's the one we're looking for, but not really, right? So the boundary dominated flow is important to us because as soon as we start seeing boundary dominated flow, that's where we can start basically bracketing our reserves. That's where we can start start getting more certainty around the EUR. But effectively, you want to also push it out, make sure you have a long productive period, and effectively this boundary dominated flow will begin when the well is experiencing boundaries in all directions, right? It shows up as a unit slope. Awesome. So this is ARPS, and one of his main contributions to the industry has obviously been the decline curve equations, right? So what he did was he basically tied together the initial flow rate and the nominal decline rate, or basically the initial decline rate at that initial flow rate to the B rate exponent called B, and to predict the rate at any time t. Okay, so the way this works is effectively the B is the rate of change of AI, and the QI is effectively a function, or the QT is effectively a function of how the initial rate goes from the initial point to the final point, with this as the initial decline rate, and this is the rate of change of that initial decline. Okay, so just the way the equation is laid out, this is the generalized ARPS equation. And if you start classifying the ARPS equation into different types based on the B factor, you start to look at exponential. The equation becomes exponential when you use a B factor of 0. So that's what the shape of that curve of the equation looks like when you have a B of 0. And for the same inputs, if you had a B of 1, that's where you have a harmonic decline, and effectively your decline looks like that. So as you can tell, the exponential or the B equal to 0 segment is one that simplifies to this equation. The harmonic equation is the one that simplifies to this equation, right? With a B equal to 1. Now the interesting thing about these segments is that you can also have a B factor that's between 0 and 1, and we'll talk a little bit about that when we cover the Fedkovich slides. But effectively, in a lot of unconventional wells, what you'll also see is that at very early time, or when you're trying to forecast your wells within the first year or so, it's really hard to give it a B factor that's less than 1, or even 1 for that matter. And you might have more of a beyond hyperbolic signature where that linear flow shows up as a B factor of almost 2. Right. So that's one of the reasons for unconventional wells. We have a lot of companies, or we have a lot, that's the industry practice, where at very early time, you might use a B factor greater than 1. But one of the greatest disadvantages of having a B factor greater than 1 or even equal to 1 is that your reserves, or your cumulative at infinity is basically infinity. So unless you basically append that segment at some point with a one that is an exponential segment that's a B factor of 0 to get a finite reserves, you still end up with infinite reserves if you end up using any of these segments on their own, right? So the industry practice is effectively using a modified ARPS segment. The modified ARPS segment is effectively, you can use a segment of any B factor, but all the segments will be bracketed by an exponential segment at the end. So we'll append an exponential segment at the limiting decline, right? So we set up a limiting decline. We say we don't want to go below 5% to 8% or something like that. And when the AI or the initial decline drops to that number, we then switch segments to be equal to 0, and that's how we get finite reserves for any of these segment types, right? And just to show you what that might look like in practice on Whitson Plus, you're looking at basically all of those different segments and what they look like on the data, right? So B equal to 0, it's hard to miss it. It looks like a straight line, and effectively you'll have that portion as well. Now B equal to 1, it stretches out. The reserves at infinity is infinity, and B less than 1, you have finite reserves, and B greater than 1, again, you have infinite reserves, right? So be careful about the segments that you use by default, and in Whitson Plus at least, it's almost impossible to avoid the modified hyperbolic, where at the end you'll have a B equal to 0 segment. The only case where you might be able to ignore that or remove that is if you set your limiting decline to 0. Okay, awesome. And now it's time to look at Fedkowitz's contributions, and mainly even though ARPS came before him and laid out the equation first, what he did is he used that equation and he used simulation models and things like that to basically say that if you did the decline curve analysis and you assume the bottom hole pressure is constant, then the B factor actually points to recovery efficiency. Okay, so he has type curves, and effectively those type curves will give you a B factor, and those B factors, those late time boundary dominated flow B factors, are effectively indicative of the recovery efficiency that you might have on your wells. Okay, so a low B would be a low recovery efficiency, and a high B would be a high recovery efficiency. And it also has correlations with the kind of fluid that you're producing. So if you're in boundary dominated flow and your data aligns strictly with the exponential B equal to 0 segment, then that would be a single phase oil, or it would be gas at really high pressures, which almost behaves like single phase oil. Okay, so B equal to 0 would definitely point to that kind of a fluid system. And then if you have increasing B factors, you slowly have more energy in system, right? So as you go from 0 to 0.1 to 0.4, you might have solution gas drive that's pushing those numbers up. And then you have if you have a B factor of 0.4 to 0.5, typically you might see single phase gas flows that might show you that B factor. And if you have anywhere between 0.5 and 1, maybe you have layered reservoirs, maybe you have more than one layer contributing. Okay, so all in all, at infinite, when the well is infinite acting or transitional, you are absolutely free to use a decline segment that has a B factor greater than 1, but effectively you do have to use a modified hyperbolic, so you can come in and use the exponential segment to cap those reserves at that limiting decline. Okay, perfect. So the different decline types, actually, so it's not necessary that maybe you always use a NARPS decline to forecast those wells. Maybe it's a ratio like GOR, or maybe it's water oil ratios, maybe it's just primaries like oil rates or gas rates, but you use slightly different segment types, right? Especially if you have multiple segments, maybe you have a ramp segment here that goes up and then it basically starts declining. So if you wanted to model that, what you would need is all of these different segment types. And so a classic decline segment will be your ARPS decline segment, right? The modified hyperbolic. A linear segment would effectively be one that goes linearly from point A to point B, and on a semi-log plot, it might look a little bit curved like that. Okay, so just keep an eye on that. If you have a constant forecast or a constant segment, that'll just make the rates flat, right? So if you need to model a period where you have flat rates, or if you want to forecast flat rates, you would use the constant segment. It also helps out for ratio forecasting. So one of the segment types that I might use if I'm using ratio forecasting is a constant or a power law, and we'll see why power law in a few slides here. But really, that constant segment might be useful. We also have a semi-log segment, and obviously that semi-log segment looks like a straight line on the semi-log plot, and that's what the equation for the semi-log looks like. Okay, so and you can also have a power law segment where you can say that the power law could be declining or the power law could be inclining for ratios. So feel free to use that segment as well. And the last one, the incline segment, is effectively your ARPS decline, but basically inverted. Okay, so you're looking at your same decline equation here, but it's an inverted one. So it has negative B value and a negative decline rate. So it goes up instead of declining like that. Okay, that's why we called it an incline, and you'll see that in the software as well. Awesome. So now let me get into what I already mentioned earlier, but effectively a linear line on a linear plot will look like a straight line, right? An exponential line will look like a straight line on a semi-log plot, right? And a power law, if the behavior is more power law, then or ARPS, then the straight line on a log plot kind of makes sense. Okay, so because at this boundary condition, the ARPS equation kind of boils down to power law. So power law is one of the most famous equations used in the industry as well. So So power law, exponential, and linear. If you're a fan of straight lines, you know what kind of plots to look for. Okay, perfect. And now about the decline rate type, right? Now in Whitson, or at least all the slides that you've seen so far, you've only seen the equation in terms of the AI or the nominal decline rate. So that effectively is the language of your communication of decline rates, right? So you might have in your company, you might communicate in terms of the nominal decline rates or in a per year format or a tangent or a secant effective decline rates, right? And so in Whitson, the interesting part is that as it should be, all of these different variations are just language, right? So it's about semantics. So if I like to specify my decline in secant effective, I might switch to secant effective, specify the secant effective decline in those terms. And the interesting part is the software will convert between these different segment or different decline rate types. So if my colleague was to enter the same well and he likes to work using tangent effective, he can switch to tangent effective, and that'll be the decline that'll be shown, and it'll convert appropriately between these different decline rate types. So feel free to switch and feel free to go take a look at the same thing in different systems, if you will, and choose one that works for you. So for me, or at least for the most people we've talked to, the secant effective makes sense, and effectively that's the default in Whitson. But you can always feel free to switch that language and look at it in the terms that make sense to you. Okay, perfect. And we did talk about this a few all throughout, and effectively all those infinite reserves are a big no-no, of course. So the modified ARPS hyperbolic segment is effectively appended when your decline rate reaches that limiting decline, right? So let's say you start off here, maybe your decline rate here is 90%, and then as you decline through the life of the well, at some point that decline rate based on the B factor will hit your limiting decline rate, right? So higher the B factor, the quicker it hits that limiting decline. But really, as soon as you hit that limiting decline, this segment becomes a B equal to 0 segment to the right of this vertical line. And that's your hyperbolic or exponential segment being appended at the end. Okay. The button to go look at where that appendage is happening is it looks like a vertical couple of dashed lines over there. So on the DCA plot, you'll be able to click that, and that shows this vertical line to tell you where that limiting decline kicks in. Okay, perfect. And then we've got hotkeys, just some quick shortcuts, or think of them as tricks to basically move your decline as you wish. So if you want to quickly perform autofit or click this button using your keyboard, you want to press Alt and Enter. If you want to save this case, you want to press Control S. And then you can also shift the entire segment. You can also shift the points along the curve. You can zoom in, zoom out, reset zoom, things like that. You can go to the next phase, or you can, if you're working through a bunch of wells, QCing them, I think these shortcuts will be really useful, where you can kind of just scan through. Okay. And really ratio forecasting, that's I know we've been doing that for a while, but I just wanted to leave the slide in here just to show you that for specific boundary conditions, and when you look at oil decline and a gas decline separately, you can kind of work out a way in which you can prove that effectively your GOR behaves in a power law format. Okay, so that's one of the reasons that we also recommend using the power law for GOR streams, and that is the same as the recommendation from David Fulford, also one of the authors for the SPEE monograph 5. Okay, so the monograph 5 we've been involved with all through the year, so we're trying to incorporate all the best practices that we've learned from there, and we're also trying to make the software a little more mistake proof, if you will, where it's harder to make mistakes because the defaults are set accordingly. But yeah, so ideally, if you look at this curve, you can see how the power law segment really models the GOR profile really well. And so we're going to actually take a set of wells and forecast GOR or the gas using the GOR segment using a power law type. Okay. And just one more thing before we jump into the software is errors, right? So you always want to keep an eye on those errors, and you have an error with respect to rate, and you have an error with respect to cum, and you have secondary plots in your DCA module, or most of the wherever you might have to do DCA, you'll have a secondary plot, and effectively that secondary plot has a bit of key information right on the plots, a few headers, a few numbers regarding cums, recovery, etc. And you also have your errors, right? So I'll be sure to point that out when we get to it. Any questions so far? So the idea is you always want to plot your data and make sure that that makes sense. The errors can kind of be misleading because effectively what you're looking at is four sets of data that all have the same error, or all the regression lines have the same error with respect to the data. So that's something to kind of be wary about, where a low number or a high number, but effectively you don't want to be in a position where the error is not meaningful. Okay, but effectively we'll be hopefully in a scenario like this, and these kind of fits would be the ones you would have to QC. So always plot your data, always QC it, and it's easy to fall in love with this kind of a perfect fit, but feel free to readjust and see where you can be better. Okay, so that was about the DCA module, and I really want to take the time to jump into the software at this point. And before we jump into auto forecasts, I just wanted to check in. I have my eye on the chat as well. If you have any questions. Hey, Henry, yeah, I see your question. Yeah, I think let's get to that towards the end, or I'll definitely make sure to follow up with you on that. Okay, I think Mo has already said something on that, but let me jump right into the software. Okay. All right. So for those of us who are new here, so as soon as you log in, you will be in the fields, and maybe you only see this one field. Can you confirm? What you want to do is, if even whether you see it or not, you want to search for forecast in Whitson. Most likely this is the only one you can see. And so once you do that, this is company wide. So you can click into it and you'll be right in this screen, right? And you can ignore these couple of projects. Those are just mine. And that's pretty much the beauty of working in a cloud software, where we can all work in the same project and not step on each other's toes anyway. So the first thing I need you to do is, since we're in the project screen, I want you to add a project, okay? So if I did that a little bit too fast, oh, Tarun, can you Control Shift R? Is that better in terms of the zoom?
Tarun, I think it's blank on the project level, so that you can create a project there.
Yeah, this would be blank for you because
Yeah,
these
it's blank for me. I don't see that main and source project.
Yeah, you need to create your own project. Yeah.
Yeah,
okay,
those are my projects. So that's one of the reasons why you can't see it, because they're kind of assigned to me and they're private to me. Yeah. So even the project that you create here, just give it a name and that'll be your project. So I'll call it Teja DCA. Okay, whatever. So that's just the name I've given it. And once you create your project, you will see your project in this list. And you most likely will not see any other project because all of them will be created as private. When you're creating the project, you have the option to set it up, I believe. But if not, you can always edit that project and change the type to company-wide. That's what I'll do with my project for anybody who wants to follow along. But effectively, my project, I can make that company-wide. Any project, if you own it, you can edit that. And if you can edit that, you can make that company-wide or private. Okay. One of the ways in which I also recommend people work together is, let's say there's a situation where you're creating a project. Maybe it doesn't have to be company-wide and clutter up everybody's field, but you also don't want to keep it just for yourself. So what you can do is you can actually add owners here, and you can basically get them to be your co-owners. Okay. So over here, I'll just add Mo, and now, as soon as I click yes, what I have is effectively this project is owned by Mo and I. And so that's private. So only Mo and I will be able to see this project, but nobody else. Make sense? I'll switch this back to company-wide. So you can see my project along with an extra owner. And that's the project that both of us work in. But if it's company-wide, everybody in this field can see it. So I'm assuming if you hard refresh or click this reload button, you should be able to see your project. Okay. All right. So the next step that we'll do is everybody with me on that. Awesome. I see a few thumbs up. I think somebody raised their hand, but I see that go down. But perfect. So now that we're here, we have our own project. It's time to get started, right? So the first thing we need is to upload a few wells. So there's a few different ways in which you can do that. Step one is to click the mass upload button. Okay. So when you click that mass upload button, you have all of these different interfaces. You can kind of go through it. But if your company has subscriptions with Enerdeck or Enveris, you can kind of export data out of those tools. And when you do, you typically get two files. One would have all your well headers and one will have all your production data. And you can drop those right into these boxes and hit save. And that takes care of uploading those wells for you. Straight from Prism, straight from Drilling Info, Enerdeck, GeoScout, you name it. Okay. Next, if you have declines that you may have in other software, you can bring those in as well. And we have interfaces to bring in your decline curves. Okay. So you would go to Aries, you would select forecast, and you would select a text file as is typical. So when you export out of Aries, maybe these are your third quarter forecasts that you want to bring in and start working on. So you can export those, add prop nums to your wells in Whitson, or maybe export them by well name on Aries. But effectively, you can bring that in as a forecast. You can call this third quarter, something like that, and you can export that, or you can import that. Okay. So all your declines can be in the software. All your wells can be in the software. And for the declines, we have Aries, Mosaic, PhDWin, and ValNav. Okay. For this case, right, for today's exercise, what we're going to do is we're going to go to the PNR, sorry, not the PNR DCA certificate wells, but the auto forecast and type well certificate wells. Okay. So you see this set of 20. We're going to click on upload right there. Okay. And while that does the job, I'll just explain what's going on. This is the example section. So if you're working from scratch and you have no data at all, what you would do is you would slide over to the examples. The first three are taken straight from the SPE data repository. And so it has about 11 wells from Eagleford, Haynesville, Marcellus, etc. So if you need to populate the project and get started on some analysis or some learning, you can do that by simply clicking the upload button here. If you download one of these, you can kind of go through how to upload data yourself. Let's say you have data in a bunch of Excel files. It may be deviation surveys in one file and production data in another file, and so on and so forth. You can kind of download one of these templates, use that as your reference on how to upload wells, and effectively get any and all the data in. So if anybody needs any help uploading data manually, feel free to reach out to support and we'll be happy to help you and maybe even get that done for you. But effectively, if you're looking for any of the certificate wells, etc., so we have a few certificate programs. If you click the manual and then go to certification, anything that we do today, you can kind of follow along by going through this, but I'll be doing a slight variation of the certificate where we'll be generating a type well for a set of wells. Okay. But effectively, we have these different certification programs. The one I'll be doing is the auto forecast and the type well certificate, but effectively you can, at your own pace, at your own time, you can kind of complete these different modules. And at the end, what you need to do is we don't make it easy for you. You do have to send your project over to certification@whitson.com with your name, and we'll basically review the project. We'll jump on a call with you. We'll kind of, figure out if there's any feedback that we can pick up or if there's any thing that you missed in your certification steps, so we can have a great productive discussion and give you a certificate for all that effort. Okay. So I'll jump back into the wells. So we uploaded our wells. Is everybody with me on that? So we have about 20 wells in the project. I'm looking at that and I'm going to zoom out a little bit. So you see, I was talking about the spilling over. So if you ever see this happening where you have some menu items over here and then a couple of them right here, you might want to zoom out. But if I zoom out to too much, let me know. Okay, perfect. I think I like this. So I think it works from my screen. The edit all sits right there. So that's perfect. So okay, so we're here. We have all these wells. Let's actually click one of them and see what happens. Okay, so we were on the wells page. I'll just do that again. So while you're on the wells page, you have a well count. You have all these options to bulk run a few things and move and copy, etc. You can also export your results or DCA cases, whatever you need, and you can also create attributes, which we'll do in a second. But effectively, you can look at your results or edit properties in bulk on this page. Okay, but let's click into one, and then you see as soon as I click into one of the wells, the first page I go to is the scenarios. Okay, so when I look at the scenarios, I can see a list of the scenarios I have. So if I create my own scenario called, and maybe I have a colleague who also creates their own scenario, you see all of those scenarios for the well sit right here, and they have a private or company-wide designation as well. So I'm not cluttering up anybody's screen. I'm basically working in my own little sandbox here with a private scenario. Okay, but feel free to go ahead and work directly on the main. Okay, as would be in a lot of the cases that that you would be working in practice. And so next, what we'll do is we'll jump into production data and take a quick look at what we're seeing. Okay, so we have a few wells. Those wells are effectively monthly rates, right? So you can see monthly timestamps and you see the monthly rates right there. Okay, so there's a few options here to kind of dissect that production data. You've got your GOR plot, you have CUMEs, you can plot OGRs or you can plot WGRs, etc. If you have water rates, that's what would happen. The other thing is that specifically for the decline curve analysis, one of the interesting things we've added is the monthly data supplemental sheet, or effectively it's a separate production data table that you can maintain independently, and maybe all you have is effectively your monthly rates right there. Okay, so what that would do is that would let you, let's say you have an operated well and you have daily rates on that operated well. Maybe you report monthly rates to your joint venture partners, or maybe you have monthly rates for the same well from Enverus or another source. Okay, so what you can do is you can upload both the data sets and then visualize them together in the decline curve analysis module. Okay, so we can feel free to try it out. Feel free to add some monthly data on this well, and some of the options in decline curve analysis would be relevant to that. And I can show you those. So this is the well. This is a production data. You can edit this production data if you need. You can use the arrow keys to go, between the wells, and effectively that's your playground, right? The production data. Next, I'll jump straight into decline curve analysis. And within the decline curve analysis, this is really the home for a lot of the declines that you might create for this well. Okay, so you see I'm in production data analysis. I'm in the decline curve analysis tab. So or decline curve analysis module. I have an address. I'm in the forecasts field within my project. I have my own well and I'm working in the main scenario. So that's how I find myself. Okay, so once I found myself, all the saved cases that I might have had on this well will show up in this list here. Okay, so if I create a case, if I do anything on this well, it'll be saved to this list here. Okay, if I have any assigned type wells, those will show up here. Maybe I have some forecasts that I created last year and I want them to be untouchable. I can definitely click on one of those and archive those cases. Okay, that archive will basically lock that decline curve case from ever being edited. So that way it stays set in stone. Okay, awesome. So what do we see here? So let's go with the main components, right? So we have the primary plot. This is your primary plot, and this is your secondary plot. Okay, so on the primary plot, the first things you need to choose is what kind of forecast you're generating. So in this case, I'm forecasting primary, so it'll be oil rates versus time, but I can always go with a GOR forecast where I'm basically using a GOR to forecast my oil, or I can go with a water oil ratio, water cut, OGR, etc. Okay, so effectively, what I'll do is I'll stick to the primary. Then the second thing I want to do is I want you to see these three tabs, right? So for that well, I'm only looking at oil rates versus time. And yeah, I think there's a way to do that, Henry. Create cases. So Henry's asking if he created cases with a B factor of 1.5, is there a way to make that the current case without creating a case for each well, more like a template? Yeah, even if that's what you wanted to do, what I would recommend is I would create a case for all streams and for all the wells, and I would set that with a name as the B factor 1.5. Okay, so that way I would that way once you have that case from the wells page, you can always edit all DCA saved cases, and let's say you have another case here, you can always bulk set that as the current case. So that might be what you're after, Henry. So if you have a case that records or autofits for B factor of 1.5, then what you would do is maybe that shows up as a named case here, and you'll bulk set that as the current case. Awesome. So I'll jump back into the well. I'll go into decline curve analysis, and then I think I see another question where somebody wanted to know how to create scenarios in bulk. Same thing, come to the wells page, edit all scenarios, and save main as scenarios, right? That is effectively creating a copy of the main scenario and calling it whatever name you like, okay? But I hope you all are working in your own projects. Let me just refresh and boom, you see? So since I'm logging in with the support privileges, I can kind of see all the projects, help you out if you need immediately. But effectively, awesome. I see all the projects. Everybody has their own, and now we should be back in business. So I'll go jump into the first well. I'm looking at that in my own project and decline curve analysis. And so if you wanted to forecast oil with a different ratio or a different scheme, you can select that there. Maybe instead of rate time, you want to forecast this on rate cum, you can choose that there. You can also switch between rate time, rate cum, and your EORs wouldn't change. You can also look at your secondary plot just to make sure your declines look right. So if I turn off gas and if I only look at oil and oil forecast, right? So what I can do is I can basically make my adjustments while also tracking how that looks like in my own folder. Let me refresh here. Oh, that's turned off. Okay, there it is. Okay, all right. So you can see that. So we're making adjustments as we go, and we're also tracking that forecast and how that looks like. We have an EUR, we have errors, and we can always adjust. Okay. In terms of setting up your segments, right? So let me show you the entire decline, and then let me show you how that looks like. Okay. So the first step you want to do as soon as you want to do anything in terms of decline curve analysis is you may want to create a case, right? You always keep an eye on your current case. That's the one that's basically displayed here. So you may want to create a case. And when you do, it'll ask you whether you want to create a case for oil or all the streams. You want to create a case for all the streams. It just makes it easier, right? So I'll call it single well DCA since I'm doing this only on just this one well, right? So once I do, it basically copies the case I created it from. So I was on main before. So when I created a case, it basically created a copy of the main and then called it single well DCA. Now, once I'm at this part, I can basically make my adjustments. Make sense? Think of it like branching, where let's say my colleague built a decline that I really like, except I want to change one little thing. What I would do is I would basically load that as my main or load that as my current case, and then I would create a case from there. Okay. It's like taking a copy of the copy. Next, what I want to show you is where that limiting decline begins. And we have a clear indication that about 7,000 days into the well life, we might hit that limiting decline rate. That limiting decline rate is set up here. And you see that kicking in right there. And about 7,000 days, all of this is basically the same decline rate because we set the B factor to 0. Okay, the rate of change of that decline stops as soon as you use a B factor of 0. So that's really the main nuts and bolts. once we are well set up with the problem, you can then start to look at the numbers, right? Now, looking at the numbers, you have an EUR here. That's basically the EUR that your decline is telling you. You also have an NP here. That's your cumulative at the end of history. So you've got 89. And then you've got remaining reserves, which is effectively your EUR minus this guy. So you have about 28,000 barrels remaining. And we're forecasting this with a B factor of 0.88. So if you click auto fit, the software is going to do its best to basically fit the data and within constraints, right? And what constraints are we talking about? So you see this little equalizer button here. So this equalizer button will give you the constraints that you're using when you're running that auto fit. Okay, so you've got peak production ratio, you've got your constraints on your initial decline rate, you've got constraints on your B factor, and maybe you also go for a noise reduction where you specify a threshold and say throughout every point that's not within that threshold. Okay, and I think that kind of alludes to Ilya's question, right? I saw that. Sorry, even though you deleted it. So you might want to use some of the noise reduction features, and that by default also does take out some of the noise anyway. So you've got peak production ratio, nominal decline rate, B. So all the DCA parameters you can set up bounds here on what's acceptable as the lower bound and as the higher bound, and go with that. Okay. Just one thing about the nominal decline rate here. It looks like this caps out at 10, but feel free to go for a higher number if you need to. Okay, so you can always go for a higher number, and that still translates to a higher decline rate, and that's fine. The 10 is just default there. But I won't do anything with this. Just so you know, you have an auto fit setting. So when you're running auto fit, you know exactly what you're doing. You're basically fitting those the ARPS decline segment within those bounds that you specify here. Let's say you wanted to specify these bounds in bulk for all the wells. You could potentially do that here. But what I would recommend is highly recommend is using the auto forecast in any case, right? So we'll look at that in the next few minutes here. But the declines, that's what the entire decline looks like. And I'll show you now that we're on here, I'll show you how to change the different decline types. Okay, so right now I'm using a decline segment, but you see I have one segment in this decline, and I can add segments using this button. So if I add another segment, you see now I have two segments on this well, and the second segment, maybe I control that independently. Maybe I want to link decline rates on that so that it's a continuous or a smooth transition between the two segments, but I have options to go with either. Okay, there's one more thing. Sometimes I've seen folks have a question where they don't see this add segment button show up, and that might be because your existing segment has already hit limiting decline before it ends. Okay, so let me show you an example of that. So let's say I took the second segment, right? So the way you recognize the different segments in Whitson is that every segment is defined by 3 points. Okay, so 2 and 3. Those 3 points, you control the first segment. Okay, now the second segment tags on to the previous segment's third point, and then has its own 3 points, right? So I would say 1 right here where it's overlapping with the third, and 2 and 3. So you can grab any one of those points and you can move your decline as you wish. Okay. The interesting thing is that you have the link to previous segment turned on, and you have link decline rates turned on. So no matter how you move this, 99% of the time you will end up in a pretty smooth transition. Okay. Yeah. About showing you how you cannot add a segment sometimes. So you see how the initial decline rate on the second segment is already really low with a really high B factor. So of course we're dropping to 5.679 right here. So you see how that limiting segment is appended even before this segment has ended. So effectively the add segment is grayed out because there are no more segments we can add at the end of this. Okay, so instead, what I would do is maybe I would drop the B factor. Maybe I would make that 1. That kicks out my end of linear flow, or the time at which the exponential segment is appended. And so then you can basically again add a segment. Okay, again that one gets grayed out because this one's behind. So that's pretty much it. You can also go for different segment types on the oil rates, but let me actually switch over to gas and then show you how I would do GOR forecasts for this one well, right? So since you created a case for all the phases, you see you have single well DCA case selected for oil, gas, and water. Yuri has a question. What's up?
Teha, could you show us how to set it up where if I wanted to just do a simple 2 segment with the capturing the ramp up from day 0 to peak and then
Yeah.
from peak to segment 2 decline?
Yeah.
Can you show us how to set it up? Because right now I'm trying to auto-fit it and it doesn't give a meaningful output when I try to auto-fit 2 segments at once and capture that ramp up cleanup period as well.
Yeah, let's actually try that out. But I know that when you have multiple segments, and especially segments that have a ramp and then a decline, etc., I think we may have some trouble, but let's actually try that out. Okay, so I auto-fit that first one. I added a second segment. Let me actually make this linear or an incline. And then you see, I want to basically move along the same curve. So what I'll do is I will hold shift and drag this point. So that's the other one. And then what I would do is on the second one, I'll just relink it and that reattaches itself. And then what I would do is I would auto-fit only the segment 2. Oh no, I see. I think, yeah, the auto-fit with multiple segments is something that we're still working on. And I think the idea is we want to be in a spot where you can set up a template of how that decline should look like, and whether that's 1 segment or 2 segments or a ramp and 2 segments, you should be able to do auto fitting on those as well. Is it the auto fit that you were having trouble with, Yuri, or was it in general? How do you set it up to have a linear and then a decline?
The out-of-fit part, because like we're talking about forecasting all these wells at scale at some point, and so like having a setup where I could just do like 100 wells out-of-fit at once with this particular setup of segment 1 incline and then traditional modified decline.
Yeah, I know for a fact that we're working on that heavily in here because the logical extension to the type well workflows is that you should be able to build a parametric type well profile. And we can discuss that a little later, but effectively the parametric type well profile is where you specify a standard decline template across all the wells. So right now what we have is in terms of the auto forecast as well is the modified ARPS single segment auto fit, or maybe we have the auto fit working really well for power law and constant or those kind of segments. But yeah, definitely something to work on and improve. Okay, but manually or sometimes I've had luck working this, but you see this time around it got right in there. Does that make sense? Maybe it's something to do with a little bit of manual adjustment and then it can pick it up effectively. Okay, so let me jump into the GOR forecast. I'll set that up with a power law. And you see what I'm seeing here on the secondary plot right here is how my power law fit corresponds to my historical gas rate and just helps me QC if I'm doing a good job with my power law fits. Okay, so let's say I came up with a power law fit for this well like that, and then called it a day. Then this would be my EUR on gas, and this would be my EUR on oil, and I'll have that saved case in both the tabs. Okay. Just one more thing while I have you is we also have a new feature that I actually want to get a lot of feedback on. So let me actually show you. So if I have a segment and maybe what I have is a refrac, right? So one of the questions that always comes up is if this well goes through a refrac and I have to reforecast it, maybe it came online with a higher rate, right? And that's the decline I have after the refrac took place. So I have one decline segment and then a second segment that basically kicks up with a higher IP and then declines back to the regular. You have an option here. Let's actually create a case for this. Uh-oh. Yeah, let me actually set this back. Part of it, delete this segment. Yeah, okay, so I'm back to square one. I'll create a case first, okay? So let me actually create a case only for oil. Let's call that refrac. So now I have refrac here, and that second segment, I'll unlink it. This segment, perfect. Okay, so let's say I had a refrac and the decline post that refrac looks something like this. Okay, maybe I have some uplift, maybe I see something like that. Right now, the question we typically get asked is, "Hey, can you calculate what the uplift is based on that increase?" Right, and so what we have here in the advanced, if you click on uplift utility, if you have two cases, right, just like me, if you have two cases, and if you don't worry about it. But effectively, what you can do is you can now compare what your base case would be. That's your single well DCA to what your uplift case could be. And it also creates a delta of what that uplift gave you, right? So effectively, we're looking at a delta of about 48 MSTB. And that is coming from the fact that we're producing more because of the refrac. And so you can see both the declines, you can see the delta between both the declines as a curve of rate versus time. And you can also see the delta as a curve cum versus time over the long term, right? So I wonder if this plot is helpful to any of you, but if there's anything there, any feedback, any question, feel free to reach out, okay? And or ask here in this meeting. But really excited for you to try this, and hope that clarifies everything along how to analyze one well at a time with decline curve analysis, right?
Does that base EUR just cut off where that first curve is? So the
I
EUR
think you can.
essentially is.
Yeah, I think the way it works is that it forecasts going or it does the delta going forward because it knows that you have production data, but you can actually turn that off. So you see how it's creating that delta from the point where you have the refrac segment. And so what if I actually exclude production history, I believe that takes care of doing the delta from the beginning. Does that make sense?
I think so. Yep.
I'll go double check what's happening here. But I hope that answers the question, Pete. Is that what you were looking for? Like the delta from the beginning of the refrac, I guess?
I guess the original case, you have to shut off the EUR when you no longer have that decline on the old well, right? Or the original completion. And then I guess you're comparing what's been pulled out of the ground plus, I guess, the new forecast for the new, I guess, the ultimate EUR.
This would be the ultimate EUR with this delta compared to your base case. All right, yeah, so feel free to try that out. At the end of the day, I know we also like to export things in and out. So if there's rates, if that's rates, daily or monthly, you can get that out of here. If it's Aries and you want to quickly get a snapshot, you can kind of get a table like this of what that export would look like. You can actually copy paste into Aries directly if that's what you like. And these other different methods where you can just export directly out to those softwares. Okay. All right, that kind of wraps up how you would do decline curve analysis on one well. There's a few bulk actions you can take where you can bulk set current cases and bulk delete cases. Maybe this is a case we no longer need. So if you have some of these cases, you can bulk delete. And so it deletes that case for all the wells it's in. Okay. I think I see question, is there an option to export curve to Aries without cumes, but as a full curve? I'm assuming you meant the forecast, but as a curve. So effectively, you're looking at exporting this black line, right? So that one, I think when you export in Excel, what we do is, when you export daily rates or monthly rates, what we actually do is we export the green or your historical data as well as your forecast as separate columns. So maybe that's what you need. You can also, any plot on Whitson, you can look at it in a table view, and that table view will basically show you that data as a table if you want to quickly copy paste it, or you can also export to Excel, and that exports the plot data that you're looking at out to Excel. Perfect. Okay, I'll jump back into auto forecasting. Okay, so we did that.
Quick question there on that Cume's question. What I mean is instead of exporting actuals to date as cumes, export it as a full backfit of that data because we're backfitting the entirety of the data. But when you go to the export Aries, the instructions for Aries export editor pasting, if you go under Aries part of it, it captures the existing production as cumes. Is there an option to have cumes zeroed out and instead have the entirety of the forecast backfitting all the way back to the start of the production?
Yeah, I think this might be it. Is that what you're looking for? The fit to start date?
Does that backfit all the way to the start?
I believe so. The cumes are zeroed out, and I believe that should be the beginning of those segments. Yeah, let me know if there's if it's something different you're looking at, and I can help out with that. Okay. With that, we'll jump into auto forecast, and really, it's the auto forecast is no different from single well DCA. It's just a way to be able to do this in bulk for all the wells. Like Yuri was mentioning, you want to do this hundreds of wells at a time. You want to be able to specify a template of how you like to fit your wells, and you want to be able to just auto fit that and then QC, right? So really the outline of how we go about this is that we initialize first, right? We have to plan which well groups are getting forecasted, what is the decline template. And so we need to grab those wells and we need to create a decline template, and we need to set that up as an auto forecast project. Okay. Then what we do is that's the place where we'll create those curves. So we'll then auto fit, review those fits, and we'll save those cases. Okay. So once we launch those auto fits, we can actually click through the wells and QC them, and we can also load them into the current case, load them into the main case, or you can save them with their own name at the end of that exercise. And that's exactly what I would recommend. Okay, we'll be going through that here in the next 2 minutes. So Forecast Manager is that next new thing where you can then, instead of just stopping there or basically rolling up that aggregated forecast for the entire project, you can now have an intermediate step where you can go through the Forecast Manager, check out your wells in bulk and QC all the fits. You can also look at statistics and see if there's any adjustments you want to make. Maybe there's some wells that you don't want to include. Maybe there's some wells that have had operational issues, and one of the reasons why they're looking bad in terms of the EUR distribution. You can also have a quick look back. You can kind of hindcast your data or your forecasts and see how they compare with the cumes. And ultimately, you can always roll up. Okay. So auto forecast overview really quickly, it's mainly built of 3 screens, right? The first screen is where we set it up and we select the wells and we basically set up the forecast template. The second screen is where we run the auto fit, we check our fits, and if we like them, we keep them. If we don't like them, we adjust them, right? As soon as so this is what that adjustment looks like. So as soon as we're done adjusting them, we can close this out and we can then save it, right? So the idea is, the idea behind auto forecasting is nobody is going to sit and decline one well at a time, right? So you want to be able to generally specify what you're looking for when you're fitting the decline, and then use the software to get ahead in terms of how many wells you can go through. So you want to also characterize uncertainty with this, where you can then start to see how some wells are falling off or how some wells actually are over predicted, and see what operationally went in there. And you can also validate some of your manual forecasts. So sometimes there's a lot of bias that gets in when you're looking at multiple wells, and let's say you get through the first 10, the first 20, the first 30. At the end of 35, you're not using a B factor of less than 1, even if the data says so, right? Because that's just the bias that's crept in from all the fatigue. But effectively, it's, if you have all those manual forecasts and you want to have a starting point for a comparison, you can actually auto fit, save that as a separate case, and then compare the two and see how that does. Okay, so with variable production history as well, when you're building a type well, some of those issues kind of crop up as you know, noise to the averaging that we're going to be doing in the type well workflow. So sometimes adding a forecast to those incomplete data sets actually completes your type well averaging workflow, right? So it prevents some errors from creeping in because some of the wells have variable production history. And we'll tackle some of that when we're looking at type well slides. But really, that's the workflow, right? That's what we're going to do. We'll basically select the group of wells we have, we'll auto-fit them, and we'll roll it up. And really, this is what the screen will look like, just so we don't have any surprises. There's 3 steps to it. There's an initialize, there's an auto-fit, and there's a summary if you want to see a roll-up. But effectively, you're looking at modified ARPs, what template. So this is the template. So right now, somewhat restrained where the templates are simple, but we hope to extend that to a more complicated template, maybe a template that you set up on your own, and then we take a stab at fitting that template onto your data. Okay, so a few different options there. I'll do the clicking and button clicks in the software, but we have ultimately in the second step, once you've run the auto fit, right? What you see is effectively all your wells. This is a glimpse of your results table. You can take a look at your decline rates. You can take a look at your B factors. You can sort this table by any measure, and you're also looking at the first 5 years of cumes. And you're also looking at your errors, right? So you can sort by error, you can sort by different things and kind of go through your QC. At any point when you feel like you don't like the auto forecast fit, and you can actually manually adjust the well, adjust the decline on that well, and just close that window. As soon as you do, that well will receive a pencil icon, and that's basically your manually edited wells. Okay, so as you're going through the QC, you can manually edit some wells. Those wells will get that pencil icon, and then once you have compared all of your wells, QC the fits, you may want to save that with a name. So you want to click the Save Cases button and give it a name. The last thing you might want to do is you might want to also compare those forecasts and go to the forecast manager to continue that workflow. Okay, and the forecast manager itself, it looks a lot like this. It's a mega table, and it has all these columns that you can check in and check out. You can select a forecast really, and that's the first step, so that you can start looking at the wells that have that forecast. And you can also look at the numbers that make up that forecast. So it's be it the initial rate, final rate, decline parameters, EURs, reserves, etc. Okay. We'll also take a look at the forecast manager, where we'll compare some of these forecasts and we'll see what happened between 2 different cases, and then see how best to kind of interpret that. And you can also lasso fit on any of these plots so that you filter to those wells. And when you close this dialog box, you jump straight into looking at those wells. So you see in here, I have way too many wells, but effectively what I did is I lasso fitted using this button some of my heavy hitters, and effectively I'm seeing how those wells or the DCA parameters for those wells are distributed in all the other plots. So you see all of the 4 plots are synced. And so when I lasso fit that section, I see those green dots or the selected ones along this distribution. I can also see it along this distribution. I know they're the ones that have a higher B factors. I also see bias, you see? So I can spot bias by looking at these vertical lines. I've basically truncated or limited my declines to a B factor of 2 or a B factor of 1.25, and I can see that show up over here. And I can also see a unity plot of how differently was my initial decline rate looking for those set of 49 wells. Okay, so you can compare wells, you can lasso fit the wells to do a quick look back and construct variance reports. Okay, perfect. And I think we're right in the middle of our training here. So what I was thinking is, before we jump into the software and start to take a look at those bells and whistles, we could take a 10-minute break and get back into the meeting around 10:40. So if we take a 7-minute break from now, get back into the room around 10:40, 10:45, I think we can get started and take a look at auto forecasts. Okay. All right. So let me actually type that out. And I'll let you go get a refill on your coffee mug, okay? All right, howdy. Can you hear me all right? I hope everybody took a quick break. I don't mind waiting another minute or so before we get started. See if I have any questions. And I think I have one from Adam that I think is pending. Is there a rule of thumb on whether creating a segment would be used over creating a new case? For example, if a compression was added and production changed, would adding a segment be a better tool to create a new case at a new point in time? Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if Adam is in the room, but he's wondering whether when would you add a new segment, for example, to account for an operational change versus creating a new case, right? Now, and I think that's a really good question because it alludes to reserves management, right? So it depends on how you like to work. So if you were to put a new segment for accounting for that operational change, would that update your reserves? And if so, then should that be a new segment in the existing case that you have that's tracking the reserves on that well? If it's just a quick and dirty analysis of what that uplift could look like, yeah, you can create a new case and add a new segment so that you have those two cases to compare with. But yeah, anytime you might have to go back to your previous case is when you would create a new case. Perfect. I think we can get started. So this type well, we'll get started with it as soon as we finish up with the auto forecast piece. And so I'll jump back into my project, right? If anybody's following along, feel free to jump back into the software, go to your project, just reorienting everybody. We're in the forecasts field and we're in our own projects. This is mine. With the name Teja, and I have about 20 wells in this project. Okay. All right. So just before we jump into auto forecast, I need you to recall this screen. So you see how this looks like, and you see what's happening here is effectively you have a primary plot, you have a secondary plot, and so the auto forecast will actually be very similar to single well DCA, except we'll have some additional settings to specify the bounds. Okay. So I want you to go back to the wells page, and it doesn't matter where you go to auto forecast from, but effectively, if you're all here, just click on auto forecast. And once you get into the auto forecast, right, you'll see that all the multi-well features look somewhat similar. Okay. So I'll just click through. You don't have to follow along, but look at that. This is the type well section. This is the auto forecast section. This is the comparison plot section. Okay. You have other features like multi-well numerical model, gas lift optimization, group forecasting as well. We'll take a look at that right at the end. But effectively, all of the multi-well features have one primary step, right? You have to first create a set of wells that you want to look at. Okay. So this is effectively your GIS map. The GIS map shows all your wells. You may actually want to go back. Maybe you have some filters that you need to input. Like for example, let's say I want to decline wells that have a proppant pump of greater than 2.5 million, I believe. Yeah, that should be 2.5 million. So if I filter with that, not equal to, but more like less than, right? So if I filter to that, actually reset. I think I have the wrong value here. So should we go over 250 then? There. So I think all of them have a proppant number higher than 250,000. Let's see how many of them are over 2.5 million. I think all of them are over 25 million. None of them. Anyway, so the auto forecast is where we were. You can actually go in, you can actually tack on multiple filters. You can actually filter to those wells. And then when you slide over to auto forecast, you'll have the option to look at only filtered wells or all the selected wells that are already in there, or selected plus filter wells, or all wells. Okay. So let's call it auto forecast. Let's call it 4Q 2025. So that's basically our fourth quarter forecast for these wells. And let's put it in the type well area called main.
Sorry, how did you get to that window? I don't see the map at my
end. Sorry, my bad. I think I should repeat that step. So we were here, right? Auto forecast. And so what you want to do, first step is add auto forecast.
Got it.
And
thanks.
That's how I got here. Yeah. No problem. So yeah, you can basically create an auto forecast. This is where you select the basket of wells you want to forecast. So in this case, I have 20 wells. I'm going to assume that all of them are my analog wells, and I'll just go ahead and create an auto forecast. Okay, let me call this 4Q 2025 set again, and then create that. Okay. As soon as you create that, what you're seeing is the screenshot I had in my presentation slides. So you're looking at the initialize screen, and in the initialize screen, what you're doing is you're specifying in a generalized way what your auto forecast template is, right? So we have a few different templates here. So we have modified ARPS, that's your classic like you can say one segment appended with an exponential. So technically two segment, but yeah, it's still a one segment modified ARPS fit. Or you can have a constant semi-log power law fits, or you can also have constant plus semi-log, constant plus power law, all these different kinds, right? So I'll go with modified ARPS as my auto fit type. This is the language I like to communicate my decline rates in. So I'll just leave that as secant effective. I'll show you what this overwrite manually fitted wells does. But you remember that pencil icon? So that pencil icon really flags the wells that you've put in manual work into adjusting the curves, right? So if I have this checked in, right, even the wells that I might have previously adjusted manually will be overwritten with new auto fits, okay? So by default, this will be turned off. You also have some other settings here. I'm happy to go into that if you need, but really I want to focus on this middle portion here. Okay, so the middle portion here is really your palette, and you can kind of set up your auto fit bounds for each stream separately, or you can set it up generally for all the streams. Okay, so let me actually get a little bit more technical with that, because most likely you might have different bounds for each stream. Okay, so oil, we're going to forecast oil, so that's a yes. We're going to forecast it on primary, and we're going to fit modified ARPS. Okay, the peak rate production ratio is your first parameter, right? So that's a generalized way of specifying how high your initial rate can be when it comes to fitting that decline, right? So a value of 0.4 to 1.2 would effectively mean 1 is your actual peak rate in the well. And so by specifying this as my bound, I'm saying that it can be as low as 40% of that peak or as high as 20% of that peak. Make sense? So if my well comes online with 100 barrels, the DCA autofit will basically aim for fitting QI between 40 barrels and 120 barrels, okay? Depending on what it needs to do to get the lowest error, okay? So if you have a really tight constraint on your initial decline or your B factor, sometimes you may have to increase this bound, but it basically has an interplay between which factors you want to be strict with and which factors you don't. Okay, so the initial decline rate, I'll set that up to the maximum. So I'll let that span from 0 to 99. The B factor, actually, I'm going to truncate that to 1.4. Okay, and so it can fit anything between a B factor of 0 to a B factor of 1.4. And so with that, I think I'm ready with my oil forecast template. Okay. Next, my gas forecast template. I would probably, instead of using the primary, we'll go with David's recommendation. And instead of primary, we'll do GOR. And instead of constant, we'll do a power law fit. Okay. So the forecast here will use a primary modified ARP segment on the oil rates versus time. And this will basically use a GOR versus time plot and fit a power law segment to it. Okay. So, and you see all of these settings are grayed out. It'll do its thing and figure out the best fit for the power law segment. And none of the wells actually have water rates. So I'm going to just turn this off, okay, for now. So you have some other settings here. You have max well life. That's your EUR forecast. Maybe it's 50 years, maybe it's 30 years. You can set that up. You can also have a cutoff rate. So maybe there's a lower limit of what your offtake capacity could look like. And so maybe the oil could be 2 barrels or 10 barrels or whatever makes sense for your facilities. And so you can have cutoff rates. And the interesting part about decline curve analysis in Whitson is that, as logic should dictate, if the well hits an oil cutoff rate, then the well is assumed to be shut in from that point forward, right? So if you have a high water rate cutoff and a low oil cutoff rate, you may hit the water cutoff before you hit the oil cutoff. So in case you see some forecasts are segment or truncated before they hit the cutoff rate, or they hit the limiting decline or things like that, I would recommend taking a look at your water cutoff rates or your gas cutoff rates or the cutoff rates. Basically, they're all linked. This is your limiting decline. So we're setting that up with 5. So just something to remember. You can bump this up to 6 or whatever makes sense to you. But apart from that, some of the other more nuanced options would be fitting partial data. That's a request that we've had quite a bit, where by default, it'll fit all the data, right? When I don't have anything checked here, it'll fit all of the data. But if I have fit partial data checked on, then what happens is you can actually select a range as a percentage. So if I want to fit the last 30%, then that would be 70 to 100%, or I can choose it or specify it in different ways. I can say percentage range, or a date range, or a last peak, or first X days, last X days, ignore first X days, ignore last X days. Hopefully, all of those options are kind of self-explanatory, and last peak is actually interesting, as it'll basically go for the last peak that you have in your data set. Okay, so for now, I'll just leave that turned off. One more nuanced option that you may or may not use is effectively using custom settings for your primary and secondary plot. So you remember the primary and secondary plot that we were looking at in DCA, that you can actually customize as you're going through your QC. Maybe you like to look at rate versus cum when you're QCing your data set, or on the secondary plot, maybe you like to back calculate your cums from your forecast start time. All of the different options and anything that you want to see on your primary and secondary, you can customize it right here. And so when you're QCing the wells, you'll see exactly the plot you need without actually having to make those clicks for each well. Awesome. I'll just turn this off. And I think I'm pretty set at this point. Is everybody with me? Is everybody ready with their templates that we'll go ahead and run out of it with? Awesome. So we've got oil, we've got gas, everything else remains the same. I'll just click on continue, or you can also click on the auto fit tab right here. And you see, it tells me that a lot has changed since I last ran. So that's because I've never run it. And without ever running it, you see it's showing us some of the default declines that are on the well. But effectively, what you want to do on this screen is click the auto fit all wells. Go ahead, do it. Click the auto fit all wells, and you'll see that the entire table is now filled in. It's got numbers, and we're now looking at all the wells, and I can actually sort this by error and basically work my way through the worst errors, and you see how I can basically neglect the error on this one because I know it has some spotty rates. Maybe I go to the next one and I can find my piece with that, and I can basically move on. But as I'm moving on, maybe there's a point where I realize, hey, that doesn't look right? So maybe I make my adjustments. Maybe I basically go in and say, oh, that's Yuri, that should be the root mean squared error. So that would be, let's say that I'm basically over here. You see, as I'm moving it here, it's basically the error would basically go up right here, 59%. And I think for the whole period, or for the period that the segment tracks the production history. In terms of that, going back to that Yuri's question on what error measure do we use for reporting these errors, that should be the root mean squared error, and that should be along the span of this segment. Okay, so let's say I make my adjustments, and finally I settle down to this as my final fit. I can continue my QC process. I can basically make my adjustments wherever I see fit, and all the wells that I've made my adjustments to, there's no extra clicks here. There's no saving. You're already modifying the auto forecast case you're in. So there's no saving anywhere. All you do is you QC your wells. And once you're done, and you can, by the way, slide between the different phases for that well in this dialog box. So once you slide over to GOR, you're looking at all your GOR fits for the wells when you go to the next well. And if you remember, I had actually modified a couple of them. And let me just refresh. But yeah, I actually made those modifications on the oil rates for these two wells. So you see how I have a pencil icon here. Now I can click the auto fit all wells as many times as I like. I can go back. Maybe I have an iteration. Maybe I don't like my bounds. Maybe I drop that. And let's say I change this to 1.3. That will show up as one of the changes I made as well. You see, so the oil max rate exponent goes from 1.4 to 1.3, and that's the change I made. And I can click the auto fit all wells button, but that still won't fit the manual fits I had on both of these wells. So you've got that. And if at any point you want to override those as well, start from scratch, you can kind of click that and go back in here and click on auto fit all wells again. Okay. That takes care of the pencil icon and you're back to the beginning. All right, so now we've forecasted all the wells. That's basically all the EURs we got from this forecast. These are all our B factors that we've used to fit the wells. The limiting decline is the same for all the wells, etc. But the next step that you would do at the end of the auto forecast is effectively save cases. And let's actually call this auto forecast 2025. Okay, so this is an auto forecast that I created for the year of 2025. So let's just say that's the AF 2025 and let's click save. Okay, so it's saving 60 cases. So the 20 wells times 3 phases. So it's saving about 60 cases. And now you have officially saved this case as AF 2025, right? So if you look into your wells, you'll see a saved case called AF 2025. Okay, so as you work through the wells, you'll see the AF 2025 everywhere. Make sense? And that's pretty much it. That's the end of the auto forecast exercise. Really what we did is we took a group of wells we knew nothing about, and we only have the rates on these wells. We set up our template with which we'll run the auto fit, and that's typically your modified ARPs, and maybe you're drawing up a quick set of EURs on these wells. And you quickly have a list of EURs, DCA parameters for any number of wells. So this is just an example with 20 wells, but I know a lot of folks do run these auto forecasts with thousands of wells in them and on a regular basis too. So if you need this table exported, you can always export it from here, or I'll show you a better way to export it from the forecast manager, but that's pretty much the end of the auto forecast. Make sense? In terms of larger management, yeah, I think Andy had a good point over there. So yeah, it did generate a water forecast, even though we turned that off, and we'll go double check on that. But you see, if you look at the water forecast, it's always going to be your default numbers, the 600 initial flow rate, a B factor of 1, etc. So since I know that none of my wells have water rates, I can ignore all these numbers. But yeah, definitely something we'll look into. Okay, is the output table editable? Technically, yes. If you edit, the table gets edited, because most of the values are actually coming straight from the decline or calculated from that decline. So I don't see the point of editing that unless there's something I'm missing over there. Okay. And I think there was a question on casing or tubing pressures can be displayed on the chart. So if you're ever in this view, you can always display the casing and tubing pressures. You see the BHP over there, but you can also display that as the bottom hole pressure. But you see you click these 3 dots and you see the show tubing pressure or show casing pressure that you can. I think Henrik might be able to help you out with that. We'll check. And per foot metrics, yeah, actually, if you wanted to create per foot metrics if you wanted to create per foot metrics for your EURs, you can definitely do that. Just the auto forecast won't be a great place to do it. I'll show you how to do that in the forecast manager, because forecast manager will actually have the EUR per foot on those kind of metrics built in. And I think I'm looking at the questions here. I see some questions in the chat, but forecast to a certain number of days, like the first 30, 60, 90 days of production. Yeah. If you go back to initialize and then you toggle the fit partial data on, and what you do is you basically say first X days. And that's exactly what your question is, right, Matthew? Like you can just say first 30 days, 60 days, and 90 days. And let me actually do that really quickly. And you don't have to follow along with me on this one. And instead of fit partial data, I might actually do a wider range on my B factors here. And I'm just doing this just to be able to generate a case. Okay, so I'll show you. So once I click yes out of it, maybe what I do is I save this case as AF 2024. Okay, let's say this was the case we ran last year, right? And so now when you go back to the wells page, you're looking at all the wells, right? If you click on any one of the wells where you perform this auto forecast and save that case, you'll see that case in the 2024, 2025. You see both of them right there. So all your wells have like a 2024 and a 2025 case now. And you'll see that whether you're in the single well DCA or the next best place to look at all these forecasts is the forecast manager. Okay. So what you want to do here is you want to basically either go to the auto forecast, or you can actually go to the wells page. Or when you're in the auto forecast, just click forecast manager. You'll be right there. Okay. But if you're on the wells page and you want to get to the forecast manager, you want to click on edit all, DCA, and then forecast manager. Just making sure everybody has followed me so far. So you want to click on forecast manager. So we want to be here at this point. Okay. And then what we have is effectively a table. I'll collapse this section to the left, and you can see the different types of information you can have. So you have well data, maybe some names, UWIs, lateral length, fluid pump, some completion metrics, fluid per foot, proppant per foot, things like that, and some dates. Then you can also have case configuration. So effectively who updated a case, date that case was updated, what kind of case it is it saved or is it archived? And effectively whether there was a manual fit on that or an auto forecast on that, and all the segments. Okay, so that's your case configuration. And then within that you have your segments. So if you scroll over to the right, you're going to see segment parameters. And so you'll see all your QI, QF, your initial declines, B factors. For the power law fits, you're also going to see the power law exponent. So if I want to see that, you see the 3 tabs up top right here. So you want to be able to click gas and let me see, I'm looking at main forecast type. I'll switch to GOR, and then you see how I basically can select the auto forecast 2025, and that shows all the power law exponents on my GOR segments. Okay, I'll switch back to oil, and I'll still be looking at auto forecast 2025, and these are my B factors. These are my start days, end days, etc. And you have forecast parameters next. So if you look at the forecast parameters, those are your terminal rates, cutoff rates. Now these can be different depending on what that last rate looks like. Maybe you have a terminal rate higher or equal to the cutoff rate, as always. And then you have some limiting declines. You have when does the forecast start? What's the life of the well? And then you have some calculated attributes. And you've got all the first 5-year CUMs, the producing days, producing months, and you've got a few more results as well. And I think there was a question in the chat on computing EUR per foot, and there you go. So you've got your EURs from those decline cases that we just saw, and you have your EUR per foot. Okay, and you've got your errors. And at any point, if you identify an issue, you can actually kind of make yourself a little QC list, and maybe you like to look at results, and maybe you're looking at the EUR per foot, and you like to look at the errors. You see, at any point, I can basically click the well and click on Open DCA. That'll load up my case that I have selected in the forecast manager as the case that I will be editing. And so I'm looking at AF 2025. I know the error's somewhat high. So let me try to see if I can help with that. Okay. So I lowered the error by about 2 percentage points. And so effectively, let's say I like this, right? So there's no more saving here. All my edits are being directly saved onto the case that's selected in my current, and I can just click close. Okay. that updated my EUR, that updated my EUR per foot, and it dropped my errors on the rate. All phase exporting all of these easy. You basically click on this and you export this table that you see, or you can export it all on Excel. So a few different ways. Definitely designed to be able to export this. Okay. So the main point here is that
sorry, but when you export it, isn't it just for that phase you have selected? Like that table would be just for the oil parameters, not for oil, gas, and water.
I think you might have separate sheets for oil, gas, and water in the same table. Let me double check. Let me just save that. Maybe that table version is just for this table that we see. Oh yeah, you're right. This does not seem to have oil, gas, and water in the same file. But what it is doing is it's exporting the table for oil. Okay. So I think we have some work to do. So let me double check on that and we'll get back to you. Okay. But I think that table should be able to produce oil, gas, and water. But maybe for now, what you might have to do is kind of go through the different tabs and click on export for the oil, gas, and water. Okay. Awesome. Yeah. So that's clear, right? So we basically select the case we want to work on. We want to work on AF 2025. Then we kind of QC the fits by using the bulk view. And I don't think we've seen this before. So let me actually show you really quickly what this looks like. So the bulk view, you can kind of see 4x4 format and effectively look at multiple wells in one go. And for the 20 wells I have, I just need to do this thrice. So as soon as I take a look at all 3 pages, I'm done QCing 20 wells. And let's say I'm okay with these numbers and I'm okay with these numbers, right? So I'm good. There's really no more left to do except comparisons and look backs, right? So one column that we didn't look at yet is hindcasting, right? How does the forecast compare with the cume at 90, 180 days, 365 days, etc.? And so if you backcasted your forecast and see how it aligns with the cumes, this is effectively what that would be. And just by the way, you can see 90, 180, and 365 days as like a 3 month, 6 month, and 1 year hindcast. But effectively for the same numbers, you can also see the errors, etc. But you can control that by using this gear icon. Okay. So hindcast customization, you can say instead of the delta cume 90, or you can actually use 30, 60, 90 days instead of 90, 180, 365. You can basically set in any number and we can calculate that hindcast for that number for you. And we can also have that number reported as absolute, or you can also report that as real, so positive, negative. We also have absolute percentages and real percentages, right? So high or lower, things like that. So you've got cume columns, you've got error columns, and you can set up the number of days you use as the benchmark. Awesome. I think you can add more columns as well. So feel free to go ahead and try that out. What I'll do is I'll stick with the defaults at 90, 180, and 365 days, and I'll click this calculate button to calculate that hindcast, right? And so what I'm looking at is the delta differences or the percentage differences. And if I see any red flags here, I can basically go in, open DCA, and start editing that case. Okay, perfect. The last thing when it comes to look backs is effectively comparing how you did last year versus how you're doing this year, right? That's a classic question that's asked around in a lot of companies, etc. So effectively what you want to do is you want to do a segment-wise comparison. Maybe you have the same template from the previous year. And so, but with a few adjustments, right? So let me actually load up the auto forecast 2024. And you see, when I created both of those cases, and the only thing I adjusted was the upper bound on the B factor. And I can tell that maybe the 2 wells here have been forecasted slightly differently, right? So that's where I can take a look at those wells in more detail and see what's going on there. But really, I have the auto forecast 2025 as selected as my main case. So that's the dark green, and the auto forecast 2024 selected as my light green. Okay. And then I can have filtering criteria. Maybe it is off of the DLIM, maybe it's off of terminal rate, things like that. Maybe I have a list of wells that I want to QC that more vigorously, so I can drop that list right here. But if I'm a visual kind of a guy, and I am, what I would do is I would build a probit and I would see how I skewed my distribution compared to the last year, right? So ideally, as the years progress and maybe as I have more data, more wells, more knowledge, what I would like to see is if I had a pretty slant probit fit in my previous year, hopefully this year we have done enough to basically make that a little more steeper, right? By that, I mean, effectively, if I have more basis and I now have a tighter P10 to P90 ratio, then that line would be a lot steeper. And then in those cases, I like to see what went wrong versus what went right, etc. And in this case, I'm actually curious about those two wells right there. And what I'll do is I'll basically build a unity plot instead of a probit plot. And so that way I can see which wells are actually lying outside a 1:1 match. And so you see this well clearly has a bit of a difference. So if I lasso include, right, and that's the only well I'll be looking at, right? So if I lasso include and I select that and I draw a lasso around that well, it grays out the rest of the points and it highlights that one point across all the plots. Okay. So you see the difference is maybe I have a different D factor, maybe I have a different initial decline, maybe I have the same P factor seems like, and maybe I have the same cume probability. So it's the difference of that led to a slight difference in the EUR explained, right? But effectively, since we filtered down to that well, we can basically close this and you're looking straight at that well. You can actually open DCA and then plot both the curves as well. And you can see what the difference looks like. That's actually good to see. Okay, maybe it's a different start time, maybe it's a different basis, but okay, I approve this, right? So that's the end of the auto forecast. Really, something to remember is maybe in terms of the organization, you have the same type well areas as your type well areas. And within the type well area, you have the same set of wells grouped together in auto forecast projects as the type well projects. And you basically run that auto forecast every time you want to redo that type well. Okay. So ideally, at least in my view, keeping the auto forecast and the type well sets kind of similar would actually create a lot more ease in terms of the workflow. Okay, so for now, I'm actually putting everything into main, but you can always add a type well area, call it area 2, and those areas can be private or public as well. So effectively, all the type wells or auto forecasts within that private will remain private to me. Within that private area will remain private to me, but you can also move them at any point once you created them to a different area as well. So if I click that, that just moves the 4Q 2025 to area 2. And I have 20 wells and I've got all the results, right? So any adjustments, any settings, anything that I've made over here will stay here. Any adjustment I made in the forecast manager will actually be adjusted directly on the case, okay? So if you come in a month later and you happen to use the same auto forecast to reforecast the wells and you make some adjustments, the very last step of that effort has to be a saving case, right? Because all the work that you do here remains here unless you save that case with a name, okay? If that name already exists, it'll just override the case. But the last step at the end of auto forecast should be saving the case. Once you do, you'll find that case in all the wells here, and that's the end of it. Any questions? I know there's some questions in the chat. What I'm thinking is I can jump back into the slides. I'm actually in a pretty good swing to go through the type well workflows as well. And hopefully we have some time left over right at the end and we can go through all the discussions we need, okay? And I'll stay back in case we run out of time as well. Absolutely happy to field those questions. So I'll jump into the slides. I'll hope that you have no questions, but if you do, I'll follow up with you from your note in the chat later. But type well really, why we build those type wells is effectively that's part of our job. We are tasked with basically reporting to the management what we believe the outcome of drilling a new well in a new area could look like. And to be able to do that, we group or pool wells that are in similar areas. We pool wells that are in the similar formations. We basically draw inferences from operational histories and basically lump or select a good set of analog wells, right? So a big part of the type wells is effectively selecting, filtering, that sort of stuff. Once you're done with that, you have the actual process of building a type well, and that's where I want to highlight the difference between type wells and type curves. They're slightly different. What we like to use here is the type well profile, which aligns with the monograph 5. And so you want to be steer clear from that mistake. There's normalization, there's condensing time, there's survivor bias, there's truncation using sample size cutoff. And there's also the question of whether you forecast the average or average the forecast. And then the question of how to represent that uncertainty, right? So let me run through a few slides and then we'll jump back into the software and take that auto forecast one step further and build a type well by averaging the forecasts. Okay. So yeah, mainly it informs production forecasts or economic evaluations. You can use that to scope out plays, reduce uncertainty, and understand influencing parameters. It's a really fun exercise, but really, really involved. You kind of dig through a whole bunch of data, try to correlate, what's the key driver. You take those key drivers and you try to identify similar key drivers in the wells that you plan to drill. And then you identify that analog set, right? But typically, in the past, type wells were often referred to as type curves, and fair. In some contexts, I think I can see the point. But type curves really refer to idealized production plots based on equations or numerical simulation or others, right, to which actual production results are compared. But type wells are actually based on actual well production data, and they represent a typical production profile for a collection of wells, right? So, but a type curve can be generated analytically using some equations, and that's what the Fedkovich type curves or Blasingame type curves really are. But what we're building here is not a type curve, it's a type well, right? It's a type well profile that uses actual production data, uses statistics to generate what a typical profile means, and then uses that as a forecast for those collection of wells, okay? P50 is typically a good choice for a typical production profile, which is basically the median. But you have opinions where you might use arithmetic mean or geometric mean, etc., and things like that. So just to take this point home, type curve, type well, okay? Type curve, type well. So you've got analytical equations, and those are the key drivers, and that equation dictates how the well performs, but those are analytical, and you want to compare that actual production to this type curve. But a type well, you're actually doing a statistical aggregation of a group of wells to generate an expected outcome of a similar well, okay? Perfect. So arithmetic mean, don't use that. It's really biased by outliers. And it's not a reliable basis, right? It's not a reliable basis to use as a diagnostic. The geometric mean is less biased by outliers, but it's still susceptible to like skewing for low values. So effectively, the recommendation that we settle down on is the P50, right? So it represents the least biased representation, and it's mostly unaffected by values, only the ordering, right? So the time function is important, etc., but effectively using the P50 is most important. The arithmetic mean and geometric mean can be used as like diagnostics to see if the data is noisy or otherwise not good. Okay, perfect. So main charts that you want to keep an eye on: rate versus time, cum versus time, rate versus cum, and the probit, right? So there's all 4 charts in Whitson Plus. We'll take a look at that shortly. But really what we're doing is we're basically taking rate versus time plots and generating type wells. You can also take cum versus time plots and generate type wells as well. So I'll show you that option. And then there's a probit, which gives you a sense of the best fit. It gives you a sense of the P10, P90 ratios. It gives you a set of really good statistics that you can use to compare the different type well constructions, if you will. Okay. Probit. What's the most important thing that a probit tells you, right? So it tells you the spread of that distribution, and it also lays out that percentile distribution that we like in the industry. We get a sense of what the P10, P50, P90 could be from that discrete distribution. And we actually get a sense of how good the fit is, and we can get a P10, P90 ratio. So that's a high P10, P90 ratio, but effectively you can get a mean, a Swanson's mean, and you can get a standard deviation of what your reserves process might look like. Okay. So it represents distribution. The shape really determines if the results tend towards log normal distribution. You can kind of also use this plot to eliminate wells from being included in the distribution if they're skewing away from the general trend, right? So if I'm looking at this plot, and if I can draw a line through the general trend like that, I would definitely say that these wells are definitely not representative, right? So that would be my cue, and maybe I can use that to say, or use that to discard these wells from the type well. So it yields statistical insights, measure of uncertainty, etc. One thing you definitely want to do when it comes to building a type well profile is normalization. And that normalization can be in multiple formats, right? So you first have to normalize time. So at the very least, you want to go back to a normalized time, start all the wells at time 0, and then go from there. Or one of the recommendations would be to use normalized flowing time, which removes the non-producing periods, or the periods where you had 0 rates. It removes that from the data and stitches the production data together, right? So in terms of time normalization, you may choose one of those. You may also choose to start that time at aligned to a certain common date, or maybe a certain common event. Like, for example, you may decide to start that 0 in time at the peak of every well. So you want to take the well and shift it forward and behind to match that peak with the start time, right? And I'll show you how to do that in Whitson. So you can, in Whitson, you have a button to quickly move between these two options, right? You want to start time equal to 0 at first production date, or time equal to 0 at peak rate date. Okay. Then the second thing is dimensional normalization. What you might have is a mixture of wells that has completion metrics, that has lateral lengths that are varying, that has proppant volumes that are varying, etc. So when you're comparing apples to apples, you can't exactly compare them when they're different lateral lengths, right? So some of the normalization that you do on rates typically could be as simple as the lateral length, or as complicated as something that's a compound normalization variable that includes maybe lateral length, maybe some depletion, maybe some spacing related metrics, and maybe you have a scaler that scales it back up to the reference lateral length and things like that. So effectively, when it comes to normalization, you definitely want to normalize the rates down to the same common denominator, and that typically ends up being the lateral. So for our exercise, we're going to do the lateral length. And then in the advanced normalization, you can have non-linear scaling of laterals. Maybe you have a firm understanding that a 10,000 foot is not 2x better than a 5,000 foot. It's only 1.8x better. You can kind of set that up in these non-linear scaling factors as well. Okay. So normalization, I talked to you about that. So effectively, you can start at time 0 for each well, or you can start at the peak rate of each well. So you see each well is shifted depending on where it hits the peak rate, just to ensure that all the wells begin at the peak rate. Okay, so that's what that looks like. So there's options here where this option, the arrow to the left, would start at time 0 for time 0 of each well, and this one or this one would be the option you would use to set start at peak time. Some strengths and weaknesses. Easy to keep that in the slide, not spend too much time. But effectively, if you align to first production, yes, it communicates more of the production profile than just aligning on peak rate. But there's pros and cons to both. Okay. Why you want to normalize is effectively without normalizing, yeah, you might have a wider distribution because each of those rates is affected by how long the lateral is in the subsurface. So once you normalize lateral length, you'll start to see some agreement in the rates and how they're declining. And then they also look better on the probit plot. So just something to keep an eye out on. So you always want to normalize, and then you also want to normalize time and remove some of those non-producing days, stitch that together. And so for us in Whitson, we have your time. So effectively, you can switch between normalized time to normalized flowing time. Okay. PS, just a safety announcement, like especially when you have these gaps, right? You might have a situation where you have a trough and you have a peak, and that flush production is effectively might cause like artificial peaks, but be careful of those and make sure you fit your declines appropriately. Survivor bias. This is an interesting concept where effectively, if you designed medicine based on all the survivors only, then technically you're not really capturing what killed the other survivors, right? That's the idea of survivor bias here. And what's happening here is you see the type well profile that's right in the middle in red is actually tracking all the way to the end of history for the last well remaining in the set. And so what happens is at the very beginning, when you have all the wells in the data set, this part of the data is, or this part of the type well profile is much more believable than the subsequent portions of the type well profile, right? And the reason is that you have a dropping well count. So effectively, these wells, what's happening to them? Do they have an EUR? Do they have a forecast? Do they have they had operational issues and did they have to shut it all down? So in that case, all of those issues, the dropping well count, the drop in rates, will cause survivor bias, where you may have the fewer wells in the averaging mix as you go down the history. And right at the end, you might be tracking just one well, and that becomes your P50. You don't want to be in a situation like that. So, so effectively what you want to do is the depleted wells are excluded from the average and the type well values are then biased by the surviving wells. So this tail of that, this tail of the type well profile, definitely don't trust it, right? So I think the thumb rule is as soon as the well count drops to about 50%, probably a good idea to stop trusting that type well profile, because the tail can be sensitive to the remaining wells and effectively then skew that forecast and then create unnecessary problems, right? Perfect. So then you've got, should you include only producing wells in the averaging calculation or should you not, right? So if you include only producing wells in the averaging calculation, what you mean is that you're allowing yourself to keep that survivor bias, right? When you exclude it or when you uncheck that option, what you're doing is you're appending the wells that actually died with zero rates, right? That is the method that's been recommended in the monograph 5 as well. But it has some reasons why you may or you may not. But effectively, what you want to do is definitely get a forecast. If not a forecast, then you figure out why these wells are not producing. Okay. If they're just young wells, they should ideally have a forecast. If not, you might as well be better off kind of excluding only producing wells from the averaging calculation, use the full set, and now you have a much better reliable average. Right. So this is the thumb rule I was talking about. Well count drops to 50% or lesser. You kind of truncate that type well profile, and then you say that's what you will use to forecast. Okay. So at this point in this plot, you might want to truncate that type well profile right here because the well count has dropped to below 8. And so if you were forecasting this decline, this type well profile, you would only use this portion, okay? 50% of all wells. Now, this is an interesting concept. I guess it depends, but ideally monograph 5 recommends the averaging the forecast approach, where effectively you take instead of using just the production history, you take the production history plus the forecast, and the type well profile is effectively just the average of all those forecasts. Okay. So if you're using the average or if you're using the P50, or The type well profile would be the P50 of all the forecasts, okay? But in this case, what's happening is you're building the type well profile on the production history alone, and then you're using ARPS equations or classic forecasting techniques to set up a decline on that history. But you see, it's subject to survivor bias. It's subject to a lot of issues. What you really want to do is go with this method, and that's what we're aiming for with the demo here in the next 2 minutes, okay? So averaging the forecast, that's always what you want to do. It also helps you generate a probit for EURs because each of your wells will have EURs, and you can then generate a probit and see how that looks like, okay? And really on Whitson, you can generate percentile trend lines. So we can draw percentile trend lines for P10, P90. We do draw it for P50 anyway. You also have the average, geometric mean, you've got the Swanson's mean, a few different ways. But what it really is communicating that for any period, right, 80% of all the values fall between these lines for the given set, okay? So really the workflow is we'll be selecting a few wells, right? We'll be setting up the x-axis, the y-axis, what we use as the normalization. We'll append a forecast so that we're not generating history-only type well profiles. We're generating history plus forecast type well profiles. And you've got your normalization multiplier. So this is basically yours. How do you scale that? And this is your aggregation basis, rates versus cubes, okay? So ultimately you want to then fit a decline and save that. And that is the end of that workflow. You then have a saved type well profile, okay? And the last step, once you have a type well profile, maybe what you did that for is a new area that's coming online. And for those new areas, maybe you already have those wells created. And all you need to do is assign that saved case to the wells, right? So let's say at the end of this step, you create a case, and then that case will show up over here. And on the wells page, you can click on edit all, assign type wells, and you can assign that type well to those wells. Okay. So once you bulk assign those type wells, that type well shows up in the wells that you assigned it to. And so you can start tracking what the type well did versus what your actual well is doing. Super easy. So cool. I'm at the end of my slide deck. I'll jump back into my software. I'll go back to wells. I'll look at these wells. We're working with the same set of wells. And if you're following along, I'd like to show you our objective for today, right? So with our last exercise, we'll basically build a type well for these Haley wells and effectively use these wells to generate a type well and then assign that type well to these wells in the north, okay? So I'm going to call this south. I'm going to call this north. We're using the wells in the south to build a type well to predict the performance of the wells in the north. And we have similar plans, similar proppant, similar fluid, similar lateral lengths. You can also actually take a look at a few of those parameters by coloring them. So if I colored this by something like a proppant concentration or a fluid pump, proppant pump, lateral length, things like that, I can actually go with proppant pump. You can have multiple segments that it'll create based on the min and the max, or you can create it your own. But effectively what I can do is I can color it by the proppant pump. I can also make bubble maps. So if there's another parameter that I was interested in, or maybe there's a formation that I'm targeting, so maybe I can color it by formation, and I can use bubble maps to represent other parameters, including production parameters, right? So I can basically choose something like IP90. So if I search IP90, you see I get a Cube 90, IP90, all sorts of things like that. So let me just do oil Q90. Okay, so I'll use that for the bubble map, and there you go. So you've got these wells, and so let's actually try that, right? So we've got forecasts on all the wells but for now, for this exercise, what I'll do is I'll ignore the wells in the north and I'll lasso select the wells that I want to use, right? So maybe I have all these filtering criteria. Maybe I'm left with a set of wells here. What I can do at the end is always filter down to lassoed wells, and I can draw a lasso around those wells, okay? So that becomes my well set. You see the filter button is grayed out because I already have an active filter, 12 wells. I can just close this, and that's the list that I'm looking at, okay? Next, what what I'll do is I already have forecasts on these, so I'm not worried about appending the forecast. I can go double check, and you see I have forecasts on each one of them. Let's jump straight into type well, okay? And I'll create the same kind of an area, so at least I'm in sync with what I did in my auto forecast. So I have an area 2. I hope I call it area 2, and I have a 4Q 2025 type well, okay? And so for that, I'll add a type well project, and let me actually call this bench 1, because at least when it comes to the type well projects, I like to create them by the well sets that I'll be using in them. So let's say I have one set of wells for the first bench, and I have to predict that for the same bench somewhat 4 miles to the north, okay? So let me select that. I've selected 12 wells. You see the filter applies across the software. So if I've filtered that on the wells page, I can just jump into the type well project and start building that. Or I can actually click this button and create a type well, and that does it. But effectively what I'm already in that screen. So I'll just add a type well project. Okay. Let me put this in area 2. Okay. This is my type well screen, right? So I can select them all, and I can then look at my oil rate versus time, and I can plot my well counts. The well count is the stair stepping button. I can also choose what I want to see in my legend. So if I want to look at geometric mean, arithmetic mean, Swanson's mean, and I also want to look at P10, P90, I can plot all of it. And this is what my plot looks like, right? There's a few options here. You can always spread the colors that are in the background. So effectively then all the trend lines or the percentiles become black, and all the analog wells become colored. Or you can also color by attribute. Maybe that's something like lateral length, or maybe by the fluid pump. I just want, let's say, 2 classifications, a high and a low. And if I do that, I do get to see which wells are high and which wells are low. I would have chosen a better color scheme, but definitely helpful, okay? So I'll reset to default, where all my analog wells are gray. And I want to show you a few little tips and tricks here, right? So let's say I want to clean out some of this data, right? I want to identify which well this is. So if I click on that, that highlights the well in yellow, and I can also see it on the map. Not only that, I can also see it in the probit, and I can also see it in this list, by the way. So the related properties table, that's completely customizable to you. So if you like to, at the end of your type well exercise, you like to just copy this table, put it in a presentation, surely you can. And you can select what's relevant to that table as well, okay? Pulls from the probits as well, and it pulls from your well header information. Quick shortcut to remove that well is I can control click that well, and that unchecks the box and takes the well out. So let me do that on a couple of more wells. And you see, I'm basically going in, cleaning up some operational issues that I'm seeing. And there you go, there I have it. And this is just 1, 2, 3, about 6 wells here instead of the 12. And my P10, P90 ratio on the CUME 180, but I'll show you on the EUR, okay? But let's say I keep these wells. I look at these 6 wells, I keep those. And in my settings, that's where I go in and sharpen what I'm looking at. So first, I want to remove the time where I wasn't producing anything. So normalize flowing time only, okay? Then I'm good with the lateral length, and I do want to scale it to 10,000 foot. But if you had a custom metric that combines multiple metrics, that would be a custom attribute, and that will show up here as well if you want to normalize that. Next, what you do is you can select whether you want to go for daily or monthly. For operated data, you might have daily resolution, so you can switch between the two and see what works out. And you can also choose the aggregation basis for the first time. So instead of aggregating on the rates and then showing you the CUME, we can also aggregate on the CUMEs and then generate a P50. My recommendation for the most part has been using rates. But let me know. I think that's an interesting topic to discuss if anybody has any thoughts on which one to use. Okay. But as you can see, by default, this is checked off. That is preventing your survivor bias. It's not extending any of the P50s. And effectively, that's the end of this section. Am I making sense? If you're curious about a well or two that you want to look at, how does it fall along this distribution of rates versus time? You can always click it from the menu here to the left, and that highlights it in all the plots. Okay, clicking this button will remove all the highlights, and you can also lock the zoom by clicking this button. So if I don't like my plot being reorganized every time I come back to the screen, I can lock the zoom to a certain month, and I can keep that ready for my presentation. Awesome. So you've got everything you need right here. Then the main thing that you want to do is you want to actually forecast this, right? But before you forecast that, let's append the auto forecast case that we created on each one of them. So you see, as soon as I appended that forecast, your P50 is extended. Oops, I need to unlock my zoom. And then if I pinch the corner and shrink the plot, I can see all of the P50 line. The last step is effectively creating that as a saved case, right? So I'll create a single segment. Let me actually autofit this, and that did it. Let me actually set up that decline segment or the limiting decline to be the same as what I had in my auto forecast. And there you go. So this is my type well profile. What I'll do is I'll create a case. This should have been the first step, but it's okay. I was already on main anyway. But let's call this P50 South. Okay. So that's my P50 South. So I used the wells in the South to basically generate a type well profile. I removed some of the wells for basically making sure that I don't include any operational issues that the wells went through. But now that I have a finalized case, I can actually add them back in and see how that looks like, right? So if I look at only P50 and only the P50 South with and without all the wells, barely any difference, right? So on the Cume scale, yeah, there might be a bit of a difference, but at least for now, I'll just leave the well selection as is. At any point in the future, if I come back and let's say I generated another case and included a few more wells, etc., and I came back in and created a P50 South for 2026, I can still go back and see which wells I included back in 2025 and which wells I excluded from the list. Okay, so that way you can recreate that case entirely on your own, and hopefully that effort is reduced because everything is right here. Okay, just a quick question where we only looked at oil, and in Whitson, unlike the other software, we have, once you create a set or type well project, right, for bench one, all your fluid streams will be within that. So if I want to forecast gas, I can switch to gas, and this generates my P50 for gas, and I can decline that. If I want to do it on GOR, I can have a GOR type well as well, and I can have a saved GOR case. And you see, as soon as I get into DCA for the GOR case, it's asking me what the software should use for the oil case as the basis, right? And then I can fit this power law and go for the autofit. And you see how the type well for the gas rates tracks with the oil rates because the power law fit is just nearly perfect. Awesome. So that's pretty much the main nuts and bolts of the type well feature. I think in the last 5 minutes, what I'd like to do is show you how to bulk assign some of this. So all this work, it obviously has a destination. I can reset the filter. And in fact, let's just say that I came back into this work about a month later. Now I have a few more wells in the mix, and these Haleys are what I'm aiming for. So let me actually filter down to them. It might make my life easier. So filter down to lassoed wells. These are the new wells that came online. And so I'm looking at those. Now what I'll do is I'll edit all DCA, assign type wells. And you see the P50 South that I had built is already available here. And that's available for oil. Let me just work with oil for now. And boom. So I've got that assigned on each of the wells. So if I click into any of the well, go to decline curve analysis, and let me uncheck some of the things that I had already plotted. But you see the type well is already in there and checked in. So you see the type well that I had assigned to this well is actually already on the plot, and your rates are already tracking how the performance against that. And if I click to the next well and the next, the type well will actually always show up because that's the type well that's been assigned to this well. Make sense? So you see that in the legend as well. So that's the type well, that's the actual. And ultimately, let's say I generated this for a pad level forecast, right? I can then take this and go to my group forecasting module. And in the group forecasting module, let me actually create a group forecast for the new wells that came online. Okay. And when I do, I can select them. You see the filter that I had in my main page came through over here. I can just create that group forecast. As an exercise, I can simply decline this as a group and see and apply that somewhere else where I might need it. But really, you can choose the aggregation type. You can choose the normalization attribute. Right now, I'll just do nothing, and I can actually append that auto forecast 2025 case on all of them. So the auto forecast looks like that. This is the decline that I set up. But if I compare that with the type well, that's what the type well looks like. Okay. So something to go back and check. But effectively, what this gives you is a good way to compare the wells, etc., and start drawing up reserves estimates. You can also go back, and it has all the tools for you to go back and look at what you did and what went wrong and what could be better and things like that. At any point, I think what you might have is you might have multiple areas and you might have multiple type well projects within those areas. And those different type well projects could just be the differences in basis, right? So for one type well project, same set of wells, I might normalize by lateral length, and then I might normalize by not lateral length and something else for a copy of the same thing. So I can actually create a copy and I can actually work on that. Even if this one is company-wide, right? I can actually create a copy of that company-wide type well project and work my own things in there. That pretty much wraps up the course we had for you all today. We went through DCA, we uploaded a few wells, went through DCA on one well. We extended that to multiple wells in an auto forecast. Then we saved those cases and looked at how to manage those cases in bulk. And then we used that forecast in a type well exercise, and where we actually forecasted the wells in the south, where we actually forecasted the wells in the south to predict the wells in the north and assign type wells to the wells in the north. Any questions? I think there's some questions in the chat. I'll take my time and kind of work through the messages here. But if there's anybody who wants to unmute themselves or ask a quick question before we call it a day. Oh yeah, by the way, just in case somebody was wondering, yeah, you can definitely use rate cum as well. So in the settings, instead of the x-axis being normalized flowing time, one of the options is cum oil as well. So let me actually go back to oil. And so there you have your rate versus cum. Well, I hope you had a good morning and a pretty productive session in the first half. Transferring type curves to different projects, that's a good question. And that's a hard one, but we're working on it. Okay, so I think that's something that's been requested. We just have to figure out how. But technically, you can always take any type well profile or a decline, and you can export this out as an Aries file and import that into wherever you need it, even within Whitson, just so you know. Okay, and whenever you're in any well, right? Maybe it's a type well that has been assigned, but sometimes you just want to compare a type well that's not even from this area, right? So maybe it's not an assigned type well that you're comparing. You're just comparing a Haynes well type well because you just got the request to do it, right? So then in that case, what you can do is you can actually import any type well. And when you import the type well or even the assigned type wells, what happens is if the scaling is lateral length and 5,000 or 10,000, we'll rescale it back to the actual lateral length in this well. So that's one of the reasons why you see the rates kind of looking similar there. Awesome. I think that covers almost all the questions we had. I wanted to thank you again for like attending the meeting, asking some interesting questions. If there's anything that struck out and you absolutely had to tell us, feel free to email support@whitson.com. You can also email me directly, and I'll see you soon. I'm really happy to close out the year and happy holidays. Last Whitson person to talk to you all. So happy holidays. Have a great end of the year and don't forget to hang your hat and see you all in January. Okay. All right. Bye. Take care.